Earlier, welcome everyone to our Crested Butte Museum virtual learning series with Dwayne Vandenbush. This is 8 of 9, so one more to go. Tuesdays at 6 p.m. throughout the month of March. Well, February too. No, January and February. Geez, we're not in March yet. Getting close. All episodes eventually go onto our YouTube channel, and I apologize for the accidental we put episode 6 twice, but we've corrected it now, so you can go and watch episode 7 and catch up on that if you happen to miss it last week. So please look at the YouTube channel, Crested Butte Museum, for all of our different virtual series and everything else that we've done recording-wise here at the Crested Butte Museum. This program is made possible by two sponsors, the Gunnison Trails and Hartman Castle Preservation Fund. It's also made possible because of you, the viewers, and our members and our donors here at the Crested Butte Museum. If you would like to support the museum and these programs that we do, please go onto our webpage, crestedbuttemuseum.com, and there's a donate button located on the upper right corner that you could easily click. And if that doesn't work for you, give me a call at 970-349-1880. We take checks, Visa, cash, or card. So it's pretty easy to do. So we appreciate all our supporters. You guys are wonderful. And we really enjoy these series and capturing these so the community can learn and grow, and so can our youth. So it's been fun to do, and I'm excited to have 2 more here in the rotation. So we have a couple upcoming events. The next one is our historic pub crawl, which is next Monday already, the 26th, from 6 to 8 p.m. Tickets are available online or down in the museum. So if you wanted to come in, you're gladly can get them there as well. We're going to have some fun speakers. We have Dwayne, we have Polly O'Brosler, and we have George Sibley. So we are giving the opportunity to purchase the books here when you register, and then you can take them to the locations and have them signed by the speakers. So it's kind of a fun opportunity to get a little extra kind of credit and some fun with the book, get it signed. After that, our next thing will be trivia on Tuesday nights in March. We will be starting at 5:30. Doors will open at 5. Teams of up to 5, or if you want to be an individual, you can come too. Things include sports, pop culture, history, movies, science, food, and so much more. Space will be limited, so we definitely want you to kind of register ahead of time, which you can do again on crestedbuttemuseum.com. Call or stop in at the museum between 11 and 5 p.m. daily. So that's coming up. And also in March, if you have any visitors or if you just want to come out and get some fresh air and walk our beautiful streets in Crested Butte, we have Glow giving tours Wednesdays throughout March at 2 p.m. So it should warm up a little bit and we'll have a great time. So once again, you can register for those online or in the store. That is about all I have to say. I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne.
Melinda, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for being on. Today, we're going to be talking about the 6 great silver camps of the Gunnison country, and probably a word or two on 50 or 60 others that never lasted more than a couple of weeks or a month. Next Tuesday is our final session, the last one of 9, and this one's going to be kind of an exciting one. We're right in the middle of ski season, so we're going to have 80 photos that we go through, and we're going to cover the history of skiing in the Gunnison country from 1861, when Jim Taylor and Fred Lottis and Father Dyer were on skis in Taylor Park and up around Crested Butte, all the way to the current date of 2024. That'll be pretty good. Now, we're going to have 3 trivia questions tonight after the presentation is over. And we're going to have kind of a special book handed out. I've been handing out the small ones that I've done, but whoever wins tonight is going to get the big book called The Gunnison Country. And so we're going to have 3 trivia questions at the end, and Melinda will tell you how to answer, and it'll be first come, first served. So here we go. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about background in the United States on mining before we get specific in the Gunnison country. In 1849, the California gold rush began. 100,000 people came to the gold camps in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It began when a guy named William Russell, working for John Sutter, had a sawmill near Coloma along the banks of the American River, and the trace, the water wheel spinning, uncovered gold in the trace. And word got out very quickly. 100,000 Argonauts turned out over $1 billion in one of the great gold areas in the history of the world. It made California a state, it financed the United States government, and it created what became known as the Battle of the Standards. And some of the camps that were organized very early had interesting names: Get Up and Get, Whiskey Diggings, and Hell's Delight. The United States at that time was on what we call a bimetallic standard, and that meant that it coined both gold and silver to use as currency. When the California gold rush occurred, no great silver mines or mining camps had yet opened. That'd be about 10 years later. So gold at that time, gold production far exceeded that of silver. Now there's an economic law called Gresham's Law, which was accepted by all the economists at that time and even today. And it declared that the dearer the metal, the more valuable it was. In other words, the less you have of something, the more valuable it is. As it turned out, there was a lot less gold in the American West than there was silver. Then, around 1859, great silver strikes, 10 years after California, began to occur. Comstock Lode, Virginia City, Nevada; Coeur d'Alene, Idaho; Georgetown, Colorado, the Silver Queen, and many other places. The United States at that time had a ratio of 16-1 between gold and silver. And what that means is that gold was 16 times more valuable than silver because there was less of it. So gold at that time sold at 20 an ounce. Silver sold at $1.25 an ounce. And if you take $1.25 times 16, that gets you up to 20. The Battle of the Standards, which now occurred, came between gold and silver and was destined to have a big impact on all silver camps in the nation, including those of Colorado and the Gunnison country. In 1873, silver production far exceeded that of gold as more and more silver camps opened up, and its price and value began to drop. Then, in that year, what became known as the crime of 1873 occurred, when the United States stopped minting silver currency. We were now only on a gold standard, no more bimetallic standard, and no more minting of silver as money. Well, all of this was going on nationally. The Gunnison country began to open up as a potentially rich mining region. And why not? Leadville, Aspen, Breckenridge, Georgetown, Central City on one side of the mountains, and the great San Juan mining camps of Ouray, Telluride, Silverton, and Lake City on the other. And there's a great shot of the #1 mining camp in the world. That's Aspen, Colorado, 1890. 11,000 people, 10 newspapers, 2 railroads, the best in the world in terms of silver. The Gunnison country was right in the middle of all of those, in the Rocky Mountains, and right in the middle of those 2 areas I've just mentioned. The Spanish in the 1600s and 1700s had realized the possibility of gold in the Rocky Mountains, but they never found very much. Then, in 1861, gold was found in the Gunnison country. Jim Taylor was one of the first to find it. In that year, he left Granite near Leadville on the eastern slope, followed an Indian trail over Lake Pass, north end of Taylor Park, and descended into the park that would soon bear his name. Taylor Park was perfect for gold. It had streams roaring off the Sawatch Mountains and into the park, with names like Bowman, Tellurium, Illinois, Texas, Willow, and Cottonwood creeks. And anybody knows that streams roaring down from mountaintops coming into a valley probably carry gold with them. In that same year, in 1861, a Methodist preacher by the name of John Franklin Dyer came over Lake Pass, went over Cement Creek, and came to a placer mining camp called Minersville, located 7 miles up today's Washington Gulch, from what soon would become Crested Butte. Crested Butte was about 20 years in the offing. There, Dyer preached to about 250 miners and wrote about it later in a great book called The Snowshoe Itinerant. And remember, what they called snowshoes at that time are what we call skis today. Other placer mining went on. Fred Lottis in Union Park, adjacent to Taylor Park, Schofield Pass, Armstrong Gulch near today's Pitkin, and Snowblind Gulch not far from today's White Pine. The placer mining era existed until the late 1860s. Then the streams played out. Ute Indians became dangerous. They didn't like trespassers, and the weather had always been a great problem with heavy snow and intense cold. But the mining frontier now door had opened a crack. All of the mining during the 1860s had been done with a gold pan, placer. Now there you got a great look at placer mining, and that is in the great town of Black Hawk. And that's a pretty elaborate operation. And that is panning out free gold. That is gold that needs no smelting. So we call it shot wire, grain, flour, dust, and nugget. And a lot of it was done by individual miners with gold pans. And they would rotate a gold pan with water and a little dirt from the bottom of the stream in the pan. All the water would carry the light stuff out. And what was left in the bottom of the pan, if you were lucky, were pebbles and heavy sand, which was gold. With forceps, they would take the pebbles out, pour a little mercury in the bottom of the pan, and then what was left in the bottom of the pan after you burned the mercury off, because it amalgamated with the gold on the bottom of the pan, was always called pay dirt. The dirt on the bottom of the gold pan that paid. Free gold. By the mid-1870s, a different kind of mining came to the western slope in the Gunnison country. That was silver or lode mining. And there you got a great example of individuals working underground or in the side of a hill with heavy machinery. Lode gold simply meant that you went deep into the bowels of the earth, probably 500 feet down, and then you crisscrossed every 100 feet with tunnels. And what you're trying to do is find the mother lode, hence the name lode mining, or tap into the vein. And when you did that, you began mining. Now remember, all of this ore had to be taken up from 500 feet below the ground and brought to the top. And it wasn't free gold. It had to be smelted. And a lot of smelters now came into the Gunnison country. And they always used to say that good gold was $200 to the ton. That meant for every ton of muck and rock and debris that brought out of the bowels of the earth, somewhere inside was $200 worth of gold. And gold was selling at $20 an ounce. So somewhere there were 10 ounces of gold within that 1 ton of muck. Your job was, with smelting, was to find it. And that wasn't easy because Colorado's gold ore was among the most complex in the nation. The Gunnison country had opened slightly in 1872 with the arrival of Alonzo Hartman and the Gunnison cow camp at the meeting of two rivers, Dos Rios, the Gunnison and Temichi. It opened a crack more with the coming of Sylvester Richardson with the Gunnison colony 2 years later in 1874. Richardson and the Hayden survey team of that year showed that enormous coal, marble, and precious metals existed in the mountains of the Gunnison country. Following the great discoveries of gold and silver in 1874 and 5 in the San Juan, with mining camps like Ouray, Telluride, Silverton, Animas Forks, and Lake City opening up, miners began to make their way into the Elk Mountains. By the late 1870s, 6 great silver camps sprang up in the Gunnison country: Irwin, Gothic, White Pine, Tin Cup, Crystal, and Pitkin. They all had between 2,000 and 4,000 people, smelters, rich investors coming in, great optimism, and 2 railroads headed in from the eastern slope. The optimism was so high that eventually by 1881, 25,000 to 40,000 people were in the Gunnison country, and the town of Gunnison was being talked about as maybe a future capital of Colorado. They were very optimistic in those days. Crested Butte and Gunnison were not the mining camps. They were the supply, the smelter, and the railroad towns that were crucial to the silver mining camps. Crested Butte especially was known as the gateway to the Elk Mountains. Nearby, Irwin, Gothic, Schofield, Crystal, and Tin Cup needed to be supplied. By the year 1880, Aspen, just over the Elk Mountains from Crested Butte, was the #1 silver camp in the world. During the decade of the 1880s, Aspen's mines turned out $100 million worth of silver, when silver sold at best at $1 an ounce. Today on the New York Stock Exchange, it's selling for $18 an ounce. So do the math. By today's prices, in one decade from 1880 to 1890, Aspen's mines turned out $1.8 billion worth of silver. Unfortunately, Aspen didn't have a railroad and wouldn't get one until the Denver and Rio Grande arrived in November of 1887. That meant during much of the decade, supplies had to come in and ore shipped out from the nearest railhead. That railhead was in Crested Butte, where the Rio Grande had arrived in November of 1881. So, from Aspen, 500 to 1,000 burros, called Rocky Mountain Canaries, because when you ever overloaded them, they would sit down and bray like a canary. It reminded miners of a canary. And these little burros carried 200 pounds of ore on their backs over 11,800 foot high East Maroon Pass, right through the great silver camp of Gothic, and then to the railhead at Crested Butte. On the way back, the courageous little animals carried supplies to the great silver town, Aspen. For many years after silver crashed, burros roamed the mountains between Crested Butte and Aspen. And there is a magnificent book written by a man named P. David Smith, Western Reflections. And the name of the book is On the Backs of Burros. And it really tells how those burros were absolutely instrumental to the success of mining in the Gunnison country. The greatest of all the silver camps in the Gunnison country was Irwin, originally known as Ruby. And there you get a great shot. The starting of Irwin City, 1880, with City Bakery, assay office. You can see in the tents on the left, Irwin just getting underway. It was located at 10,033 feet, surrounded by the Ruby Range, Mount Owen, Purple, and Ruby. The route into Irwin was up Ohio Creek, over Ohio Pass, and then straight into the silver camp, which was right next to a beautiful lake, originally called Lake Brennan, for a prospector named Jim Brennan, who had been there in 1872, but later on named for Dick Irwin, who we'll talk about momentarily. And there you got 5 people in a boat on Lake Irwin in 1880. That's about as early as we can get a picture of. Irwin was located at the head of a steep gulch, 10 miles west of Crested Butte. The silver around Irwin was found by 2 prospectors down on their luck, 6 days apart in 1880. One find was made by a man named A.T. Gilkerson, who had found nothing in Gothic and came to Ruby Gulch hoping to make enough money to get his family and he back to the Midwest. While there, he noticed a ledge that had been laid bare by horses' hooves. An assay showed it to be rich with ruby and wire silver. Gilkerson named that mine the Lead Chief, and he sold it for $50,000. A lot of money at that time. 6 days later, William Fisher, a tenderfoot from Maryland who had never seen a mine, became stuck with his ox team and heavily laden wagon in Ruby Gulch. He was pulled out by a Missouri prospector named Orville Mace and his strong brace of mules. The grateful Fisher told Mace he would give him half interest in the first mine he found. The next morning, Fisher found a great vein of silver laid bare by Coal Creek. He named his mine the Forest Queen, and he gave Mace a mine he called the Ruby King. Mace would sell his mine for $100,000. Fisher sold his for $50,000. That began the Irwin boom. Prospector Dick Irwin spread the word that a great strike had been made. Irwin had prospected the entire length of the Rocky Mountains from Canada to Mexico. He had been a Pony Express rider and had served in the Colorado legislature. Grateful miners named the silver camp after him. 40 feet of snow fell on the 50 or so miners brave enough to stay during the winter of 1879 and 80. 2 men who skied in observed no houses, but they saw a hole in the snow and smoke coming out from it. They asked somebody, "Is this Ruby Camp?" One of the miners who was in the area said, "You're on it." There you get a great picture of the way they got around in Irwin. That's 1883. And that is right before a race. And the two legendary guys you're looking at in the front, we'll talk about them next time. Charlie Bainey, 16-year-old boy from Crested Butte, one of the great skiers of them all. And the legendary Al Johnson on the right. They named the Al Johnson race for him, and both those guys were famous, and we'll talk about them a lot more next Tuesday. By the summer of 1880, Irwin seemed to have it all. Rich silver mines like the Forest Queen and Bullion King. Rich investors arriving with names like Rothschild, DuPont, Rockefeller, and the Denver-South Park Narrow Gauge Railroad coming in over Ohio Pass. There you got a great shot. The guy on the left is Joseph Block, and the guy on the right is Beecher Bainey. And they are skiing at Irwin in 1880. And you can see the course is unprepared, and they got guide poles. A lot more about that next Tuesday. The population of Irwin now swelled to 4,000. John E. Phillips started his famous Elk Mountain Pilot newspaper. And there you see it. 1881, you can make out the sign on the building, Pilot Office, famous Elk Mountain Pilot newspaper. 529 houses went up, some 2 stories high. A bank came in, a post office came, along with 23 saloons, 7 dance halls, and many houses of prostitution, employing women with names like Slanting Annie, Timberline Kate, and Pass Out. The 3-story Windsor Hotel was built and counted as his guests U.S. Grant, John Jacob Astor, and William Vanderbilt. And there are the pretentious houses on the main drag of Irwin, right at the head of the gulch in 1880. One of the top men who came into Irwin was Jack Haverly, the minstrel king of the United States, who was grossing $10,000 a week with his troops. Haverly came into Irwin the first day, and he saw a poker game existing in a tent. And he walked up and he asked one of the miners in the poker game, what's the limit? And sizing him up, the miner said, miner thought he was a dude. He sized him up and he said, the sky's the limit. And then Jack Haverly began to peel off $20 bills off a big roll. And the miner gulped and said, I meant our local sky. It's only $20 high here. Haverly bought many mines in Irwin, invested thousands of dollars in the camp, and eventually, when the boom collapsed, went broke. Nellie Bly, famous New York reporter who had been around the world in 80 days, came to report on the booming mining camp in 1881. And John E. Phillips told a great story about he and about 4 other miners taking her skiing. And Nellie Bly had never been on skis, and she upset, feet straight in the air, head down. They finally got her upright, and everybody was laughing. And Nellie Bly didn't like being laughed at by a bunch of damn hicks, and she pointed her finger under John E. Phillips' nose and said, sir, it's pretty obvious that you are no gentleman. And John E. Phillips was equal to the task. He said, madam, after seeing you in the snow, it's also obvious to us that you are no gentleman. Irwin was a wide open and bristling mining town. 2 bands played on either end of Main Street. Dance halls were filled nightly, and a theater which held 600 people gave nightly performances. There you get a great shot of the Irwin School in 1880. Pretty nice building for 1880. The Irwin boom lasted until 1884, and then it was all over. The causes were many. Weather often closed the camp for months at a time. The Denver-South Park Railroad never made it into camp as the boom had busted. James Grant, the great smelter king of Leadville, had visited Irwin, and he said the veins of ore were only knife blade seams thick. And finally, the collapse of silver prices in 1893 ended Irwin. Irwin still exists today, beside the beautiful lake that bears its name, at the head of both Coal and Anthracite creeks, and perhaps 75 people living off the grid. 8 miles north of Crested Butte, at the junction of the East River and Copper Creek, and in the shadows of 12,500-foot-high Gothic Peak, another great silver camp sprang up in 1879, Gothic. And there you got a great look at Gothic, 1880, just starting to boom. Tents, cabins. On the left, you can just see the lower reaches of Gothic Mountain. Silver discoveries brought 4,000 people into the area by 1880. And daily, 500 burros carrying aspen ore to Crested Butte and then carrying supplies back went right through Gothic. 2 hotels were built. The largest was the Gothic Hotel. And there you see it, ladies and gentlemen. That is a 3-story Gothic hotel, 1882, with Gothic Peak right above it at 12,500 feet. The Gothic Hotel had 32 rooms. Gothic also had smelters, 3 newspapers, 14 saloons, a city hall, which still exists, cornet band, and rich mines. The richest of them all was the Sylvanite, 3 miles up Copper Creek, which turned out over $1 million. And there you see the great Sylvanite, 3 miles up Copper Creek. There is the mine entrance, and there you got the cars bringing ore down, going up and down, a little bit of a tram. The famous Sylvanite. U.S. Grant visited Gothic in 1880, and he got in a poker game, and people were trying to lose to Grant so they could give him stock in some of the mines. But Grant could hold his liquor pretty easily and knew what was going on and never accepted any of the shares of mining stock in Gothic. The miners thought that would be good publicity. Every evening in Gothic, a big bonfire was lighted on Main Street, and a huge crowd gathered, telling stories and singing. Foot races came. Gothic had a man who had never been beaten. And then the word got out that in the next race against a Crested Butte runner, he had been paid off to throw the race. The miners in Gothic got to him and said, "You lose this race and you're dead." Well, I can tell you for sure that the Gothic runner won again. Horse races were also run on the edge of town, and at night a 4-piece orchestra played for dances. The famous writer Fitzmac, James McCarthy, wrote in a magazine, The Great Divide, about the hanging of a Chinese man in 1881 in Gothic. Tremendous avalanches roared off Gothic Peak. One young girl from Gothic reminisced, and I quote, "We used to hear the loud roaring and watch the huge slides that came down from the mountain across the river from the town." Gothic was one of the centers of great ski races in the 1880s. Races took place on the steep side of Gothic Mountain. In 1886, 17 skiers competed in heats of 3 on a course that was 1,900 feet long. Frank Williams won the race in 22 seconds, straight down. By the middle 1880s, like Irwin, Gothic began to slide downhill. Lou Waite, owner of the Silver Record newspaper, left in 1888, stating, quote, "After living on wind pudding, Copper Creek soup, Gothic scenery, and promises of bummer subscribers," he left. Lack of high-grade ore, falling price of silver marked its end. Periodic revivals came, but the good times were all gone. However, one old-timer did not leave. Garwood Judd, who came in 1879, stayed until his death until 1930. Fox Movietone News made a movie about him, and it was called The Man Who Stayed. He was the unofficial mayor of the nearly deserted mining camp of Irwin, and today, nearby Judd Falls is named for him. And we're going to put up a photo of the plaque. That's right up Judd Falls, about a mile out of Gothic, going up Copper Creek. The Man Who Stayed, Garwood Judd, 1879 he came in, died in 1930. Another legendary man associated with Gothic was Dr. John C. Johnson, former biology prof at Western State College, and an original staff member on the original faculty in 1911. He left his job at the college in the late 1920s because the Ku Klux Klan had taken over not only Western State, but Gunnison, the Colorado legislature, the mayor of Denver, the governor of Colorado, and many Western states. Johnson was a Catholic, so obviously considered very suspicious. Johnson went on to start the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory in Gothic in 1928. It's world famous today because of its studies on global warming and climate change. And then there's Billy Barr, who has lived there year-round in Gothic since 1973, taking measurements of snow and temperatures daily. The United States government came in the last year and used his studies as they study the weather around Gothic today. Tin Cup, located at the south end of beautiful Taylor Park along Willow Creek, another great mining camp started in 1879. And there it is, first known as Virginia City. That's the way Tin Cup looked in 1905. Taylor Park was the first area placer mined in the Gunnison country in 1861. The Ute Indians called it the Valley of the Gods. 9,000 feet high, surrounded by high mountains and passes, it's one of the most beautiful areas in all of Colorado. Aspen, just to the north over Taylor Pass, and Pitkin, just to the south over Cumberland Pass, are not far away. The original name of Tin Cup was Virginia City, but the post office forced a change because of confusion with Virginia City, Montana, and Virginia City, Nevada. And Tin Cup got its name by virtue of Jim Taylor going after his horses, which had run off in 1861, taking a tin cup out of his sack, scooping up a little water out of Willow Creek, and suddenly finding a half an ounce of gold. And later on, they decided that Tin Cup would be a perfect name for the area. The Black Hills Gang, rough outlaws, were among the first into Tin Cup, and 3 lawmen were murdered there in the first 2 years. Though gold brought the first miners in, silver discoveries in the late 1870s brought thousands into the Tin Cup area. Great mines had names like the Gold Cup, the Enterprise, and the Blistered Horn. Now there's a shot of the mining engineer, Carl Foster, north end of Taylor Park, 1909, leaving for the winter and saying goodbye to Sadie Hines, the telegraph operator. Tell you a little personal story. Mid-1970s, I get a letter in a box from Chatham, Massachusetts. It's from Carl Foster. And he said, I'm 92 years old and I failed quite a bit in the last year. But I was the mining engineer from 1908 to 1914 at the Enterprise Mine. And I heard you're working on a book in the Gunnison country. So I'm sending you 100 photographs of Taylor Park and Tin Cup from 1908 to 1914. I always wished that I had been able to contact Carl Foster. He died soon thereafter. But when they had put the interpretive sign in at Dorchester, right near the Enterprise Mine at the north end of Taylor Park, I gave him the photos and the information with the instructions that it had to say, courtesy of Carl Foster. Though gold brought in the first miners into Tin Cup and Taylor Park area, silver discoveries now occurred in the late 1870s, and they brought thousands in. Great mines, as I mentioned, were the Gold Cup, the Enterprise, and the Blistered Horn. By the late 1880s, 2,000 people lived in Tin Cup, and another 2,000 nearby. Access was limited because of high passes and because Tin Cup was in the middle of nowhere. A railroad was graded into Taylor Park, but it never arrived. Legendary people lived in Tin Cup. One was Aunt Kate Fisher, a black woman, an ex-slave from Virginia. She came into Tin Cup from Leadville and Buena Vista in 1880, ran a restaurant and a hotel. When she died in 1901, 21 years later, the entire camp turned out for her funeral, buried in the Tin Cup Cemetery. She was beloved. Another famous resident of Tin Cup was Alex Perrin. He was from the San Laurentian Mountains of French Quebec, Canada, and had learned to ski there. After an explosion in the mine injured his hand, Perrin became the mail carrier of the region from 1880 to 1918, 38 years. On skis in the winter, horseback in the summer, Perrin became a legend as he carried the mail from St. Elmo on the eastern slope, past Mirror Lake, to Aspen, a 3-day trip. St. Elmo, Tin Cup Pass, Tin Cup, 25 miles through Taylor Park, 11,800-foot high Taylor Pass, down Express Creek, into Ashcroft, and then Aspen. 3 days on skis in the winter, horseback in the summer. Uli Shear was another well-known figure. He was a trapper and a bootlegger. One of the great stories concerns anytime anybody wanted bootleg liquor during Prohibition, they would put a flag up by their home. And then Uli Shear would go down to Red Mountain Creek's mouth and leave illegal liquor in a stump, a rotten stump. And then people would pick it up and leave the money. Uli Shear was arrested one time for illegal liquor, and they said, "Is this your liquor?" Sheriff said, and he said, "Don't know unless I taste it." Uli Shear always allowed himself to get arrested around November so he could spend the nights in the winter in the jail, warm and good food. And today, at the Crested Butte ski area, Diane Muller has named the old Twister warming house Uli's Cabin. Tin Cup, like the other silver camps, faded in the late 1880s. The ore was low grade, no railroad. Terrible weather caused its demise. Got down to 61 below in Taylor Park in 1961. Coldest ever recorded in Colorado. Beat out by Maybell 24 years later, 62 below. Now there's a great picture of one of Carl Foster's good friends, William Sheldon, a forest ranger. There was water down there, 51 inches, and they put a stake where the water was. So Sheldon is down with a bucket getting water, and his Canadian webs or snowshoes are right by him. Great shot. Today, about 75 people live in Tin Cup in the summer, and the beautiful town hall has been restored with square dances every Friday night. 8 miles away, Taylor Park and the Taylor Reservoir. Now, one of my good friends lives in a cabin in the summer in Taylor Park. His name is Frank Seaton. He is a mining engineer, has been around the world. And Frank Seaton has been coming into Taylor Park ever since the summer of 1924, which means he's turning 100 this year. The longest serving resident probably in the history of Tin Cup in the Taylor Park area. One other interesting story. A guy by the name of Pete Smythe had a radio program in the 60s and the 70s called East Tin Cup. And his radio program would always start with somebody coming in and ringing the bell. So Tin Cup got a lot of publicity from Pete Smythe's radio program called East Tin Cup. Another great silver mining camp was 28 miles southeast of Gunnison, located on Quartz Creek, when Pitkin sprang up in 1879, named for Governor Frederick Pitkin, the current governor of Colorado. Early placer miners had done well there in the 1860s up Armstrong and other gulches. And a famous story is told about Karl Warensky. Warensky was a Polish citizen who was conscripted to work on a Russian boat called the Katsov, which docked in San Francisco in 1862. And Warensky escaped, made his way to Denver, fell in with 7 other miners, came to the western slope where Pitkin is today, Armstrong Gulch. They took $50,000 worth of gold out of the stream. And as long as they had trinkets to give to the Ute Indians, they were okay. But when the trinkets began to run out, the Indians became surly. And what the miners did was put the gold in a wooden box and bury it under an overhanging rock ledge. And they tried to get out of the park. The Indians followed them, killed everybody but Warensky, who escaped, got to Denver, found that his mother and his sister were living in dire circumstances in Poland, went back, was arrested, served many years in a Siberian prison camp, and then a sentence was commuted, came back to Colorado, came back to where the gold was buried, he thought. But now there were 2,000 people living in Pitkin, and nothing looked the same as it did in 1862. So he's about ready to give up, and ran into a guy named Dutch Henry Scherenbeck, who had been an early prospector in the 1860s. Scherenbeck helped Warensky find the gold, and he walked out with $50,000 worth of gold, paid for a year's subscription to the Pitkin Independent newspaper, and went back to Denver. Kind of a legendary story. Silver brought in 4,000 into Pitkin in the early 1880s, all seeking silver. There's a great shot of Pitkin the way it looked in 1880. However, one of the great gold areas opened 9 miles away up Gold Creek near Ohio City. 4 great gold mills were built, all 3 stories high. Carter, Gold Link, Sandy Hook, and Raymond. Millions of dollars of gold was taken out of the mines there. Pitkin grew rapidly with the gold and silver discoveries and with the arrival of the Denver South Park narrow gauge railroad train in 1882, which came in through the famous Alpine Tunnel high above Pitkin. The mineral veins in Pitkin's mines, very rich near the surface, played out after 75 feet. The handwriting was on the wall, and Pitkin's great days were numbered. And there you get a great look at the buildings right along the main drag of Pitkin in 1881. The low-grade ore, the closing of the Alpine Tunnel in the winter, the falling price of silver, and the end of the South Park Railroad in 1910 was the death knell for Pitkin. After the turn of the century, it became a near ghost town. 2 things, however, kept Pitkin alive, though. One was the Trinchera Lumber Company, which employed 400 men and logged the Quartz Creek area, turning out lumber for mine props, railroad ties, and buildings. The other was the State Fish Hatchery, which opened on the edge of town in 1913. Today, Pitkin has around 100 residents year-round, and the old Pitkin Hotel has been renovated and will open up this summer. Can't wait. One of the last of the great silver camps of the Gunnison country was White Pine, named for the great stands of pine near the headwaters of Tamichi Creek and just on the west side of Monarch Pass. Rich silver mines like the May Mazeppa, the North Star, and the Carbonate King brought in 2,000 miners by 1881. Old Monarch Pass, one of 3 Monarch Passes, opened in 1879 and allowed Barlow and Sanderson stages to bring people in. The Denver Rio Grande Railroad considered running a 10-mile branch line into White Pine from Sargent's along Tamichi Creek, but when mining began to fade, that dream died. There's a great shot of a lady in White Pine on skis with her 1-year-old son in a snowdrift box mounted on a sled, getting ready to ski 10 miles from White Pine to Sargent's to catch the train. This is in 1940. George Root started the White Pine Cone newspaper, great name, in 1883, and it became famous for its sarcastic reporting. The Horseshoe Saloon was the favorite gathering place, 25 by 50 feet, pool table, and 5 round tables for gambling. Like most mining camps, White Pine usually had a large stock of liquor on hand, but in January of 1884, it ran out. This caused one miner to lament, and I quote, "For 2 whole days there was not a drop of whiskey in town. Nothing but a liberal supply of peach brandy and bottled beer prevented a panic," unquote. Another saloon had a unique name, and it opened in 1881, the Dewdrop Inn, DEW. A nearby Battle Mountain in the fall, a perfect Liberty Bell was seen with aspens among the evergreens. The 1893 panic took White Pine down, but not for long. Unlike other silver camps in the Gunnison country, the camp's best days were ahead of it. In World War I and World War II, the U.S. needed lead and zinc for the war effort. This led the Akron Mining Company in World War I and Callahan lead and zinc in World War II to prosper. And there you got a good look at the Callahan lead and zinc mill coal mining operation in the 1930s. Millions of dollars of lead and zinc came out of the mines of White Pine. The ore was taken by truck to the DNRG railhead at Sargent's and then shipped out. Over 100 men worked in the mines, which operated until 1953. The miners even built a rope tour for their children to ski, one of 11 areas of the Gunnison country to have lifts. Today, White Pine, most of White Pine, is owned by retired members of the Los Angeles Police Department. So, and I emphasize, there's no crime in the little community today. The last of the great silver camps was Crystal. Final one, most remote. Crystal was on the banks of the river which bears its name, 15 miles north of Gothic, and separated by the fearsome Crystal Canyon, the Devil's Punch Bowl. And there is a great shot of Crystal, and downriver 5 miles of the equally great town of Marble. Crystal boomed in 1880 with rich mines like the Black Queen, the Whopper, and the Lead King, bringing 2,000 miners in. The town father and top man in town was the legendary Al Johnson. He had a store, owned several mines, and was the postmaster. Johnson carried mail from Crystal to Crested Butte, 22 miles away, in the winter on skis, through some of the worst avalanche country in the nation. And there is a great look at the Crystal Snowshoe Club, which means skis at that time. Johnson is not in that photograph, but you can see the men and the women skied together. Crystal Canyon had a 17% grade and vomited avalanches through the 1 mile gorge. With 11-foot skis, a guide pole, leather toe piece, and heel block, and a 50-pound pack on his back, Johnson let him run through the canyon and hoped he would not fall. Now there, the next picture is a shot. These are the Devil's Punch Bowls, and that is the Crystal Canyon Road. It's about 1 mile long, very narrow and very, very difficult road. The famous Crystal Mill, the second most photographed site in Colorado, was built in 1893, and it operated until 1917. It had a powerhouse, 20 by 50, a 90 horsepower turbine water wheel, which ran an air compressor to power 3 mines on the other side of the road. Let's go back to that previous photo. In 1971, on that road, 12 people died in 2 separate accidents 3 months apart. One man by the name of Robinson, a professor at Illinois University, had 12 people in a Jimmy, and he was coming up in a rainstorm, and he went off the side of the road, and his vehicle went into the Devil's Punch Bowl, the lower punch bowl you can see there. 9 people died in that accident. About 3 miles above the Devil's Punch Bowl is Emerald Lake, and a Jeep went off there into the lake 3 months later. 12 people dying within 3 miles of each other on that very dangerous road. Crystal didn't last long, but it became famous because of the mill and Al Johnson, and the fact that it was only 5 miles from Marble to the south, the #1 marble town in the world. The great days of precious metal mining pretty much ended after the silver panic of 1893. When that happened, the price of silver fell to 58 cents an ounce, and the silver towns were done. There were some revivals, and gold, silver, lead, zinc, copper, and molybdenum, and rare earth metals still remain. The future awaits. The mining frontier in the Gunnison country was enormously important for the following reasons. Millions of dollars of rich mineral wealth came from the area. Mining brought in railroads, smelters, and thousands of people. It opened the Gunnison country. It led to much philology, which I call the folk spirit of a people, to songs like Casey Jones, books like Roughing It, and the optimism that was part of the American West. And it also led the Gunnison country to become the most versatile mining area in the nation. In addition to all the precious metals, the county turned out uranium, marble, granite, and coal. And as we leave the mining frontier of the Gunnison country, I want to end with a great poem written by a Denver Post reporter named Eugene Field called Casey's Table D'Ote. And he wrote this about a once great mining camp called Gold Hill above Boulder. He had left that mining camp when it was booming and had been transferred over to Denver. And he came back many years later and the boom had busted. And he lamented in a great poem called Casey's Table D'Ote. And I'm quoting, "Oh, them days on Red Hoss Mountain when the skies was fair and blue, when the money flowed like liquor and the folks was brave and true, when the nights was crisp and balmy and the camp was all astir, with the joints all throwed wide open and no sheriff to demur. Oh, them times on Red Hoss Mountain in the Rockies far away, there's no such place nor times like them as I can find today. What? Though the camp is busted, I seem to see it still, lying like I love it on that big and warty hill, and I feel a sort of yearning and a choking in my throat when I think of Red Hoss Mountain and of Casey's table d'ote." That, ladies and gentlemen, takes care of the silver camps, and we are now about ready to go in to the 3 questions over today's presentation for the Gunnison Country book, the big book. So Melinda will tell you how to answer. First come, first serve. Got to get them all.
You have to put them all in your one answer. So maybe after question 2 that we pause for like a second so they can type, get caught up. So put all 3 of your answers in your response. You have to have all 3 right. So get into the chat box, get your fingers on the keyboard, and here we go.
Here we go. Question number 1. I want to know the legendary skier who carried the mail from St. Elmo to Aspen through Taylor Park. Summer in the horse by summer, skis in the winter. Question number 1. Secondly, I want to know the man who stayed in Gothic from 1879 to 1930 and had a movie made about him.
Okay.
Now we're pausing for
Pausing
just
so you can
2
type.
seconds. And thirdly,
You have to have all 3. Just wait, guys.
we talked about I don't want to give this away, a building in one of those 6 mining towns I talked about that is the second most photographed site in Colorado behind the Maroon Bells near Aspen.
All right, all 3 answers.
Those are the 3.
Is that correct? Right here. Hal Johnson.
Al Johnson is not correct. This is the guy in Taylor Park.
All right.
We're searching for the great snowshoe carrier in Taylor Park that went from St. Elmo on the eastern slope over Tin Cup Pass, into Tin Cup, through Taylor Park, over Taylor Pass, down Express Creek, and into Aspen. Some people have answered the last 2 correctly, but not that one. So Al Johnson is not the skier. So we're awaiting a new answer.
Mhm.
And no, it's not Foster, not Carl Foster. He's the mining engineer. We're still awaiting the guy who carried the mail. We got the man who stayed, Garwood Judd. We got the Crystal Mill, but we do not have
Here we go.
Father Dyer, not correct. Newman, not correct.
Oh my goodness.
We're searching for the man. Ollie is not the first name. Durant, no. We're still waiting for the name. This guy was from the French San Laurentian Mountains of French Quebec, Canada. Had a mining accident that injured his hand and became the mail carrier from St. Elmo through Tin Cup all the way to Aspen from 1880 to 1918. No, not Alexander Durat. There we go. Karen Zelenko has got it. Alex Parent, Judd, and the Crystal Mill.
Woo!
Karen, let me ask you, do you have the copy of the Gunnison Country book? And if you do you want another one? Because you won. Otherwise, we'll give it to the next person that answered, which is Marianne Reagan. We're waiting for her answer.
I have the book.
Okay, you want to give that book up, Karen? Okay, so the next one is Mary Ann Regan. Mary Ann's got Alex Parent. Very good. Mary Ann, before we get off, we want your address and we'll send the book. Now, before we get off, though, and we're waiting for that, are there any questions that anybody has or any comments that anybody has? Just go to the chat board and fill us in. Can you tell the story? Yeah, the world record elk. Yeah, that's right. I'll tell you that. John Plute, Plute, is the guy who shot the elk in the dark canyon on the other side of Kebler Pass in the year 1905. And for a long time, it was the biggest rack. It has been beaten by 4 elks today, but 3 of them have come from farms, so they're not, you can't count it. But 1 elk has beat it. Yeah, Bill, thanks for the kind comment. What caused the devaluation of silver in 1893? That occurred because there, by Gresham's law, gold was much more valuable than silver. And the Republican Party and conservatives and the bankers wanted gold to be the standard. So the more gold that was produced, the price began to go down because it was too much. And the limited amount of gold was a little better economically. You know, I had a course in that at Oklahoma State. When I got done with the course about all of this, I was pretty sure I didn't know really what happened, and I knew the professor didn't know either. It's very complicated. Mike Callahan says Garwood Judd, 50 years to the very day he arrived in Gothic. Wow. Wow. Wow, that's great.
Well, we're going to be doing some of these trips too, van trips again this summer. So stay tuned for that because we will be going to Tin Cup. We will be going to the Black Canyon. We have a few more lined up. So those will begin in July, every other Wednesday throughout August.
They begin on July the 11th and then July the 26th. And I think August the 9th and August the 23rd. So one's going to be to the Black Canyon. One's going to be into the Taylor Park area. One's going to be, I think, to Lake City. And we'll let you know.
We will. More of that information will be in our newsletter, which you can sign up on our webpage to stay tuned for everything that comes forward here at the museum.
And we're also going to have publicity coming out soon via Melinda about the history of the San Juan mining camps that I think we're going to do starting on June the 17th. And visiting Ouray, Telluride, Silverton, and Durango. Very exciting.
Yep, we're working out those details. And once again, that information will be available in the next couple of weeks. So we hope you can attend. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, we hope everybody is able to come to hear the history of skiing in the Gunnison country with 80 good photos. Any other comments or questions? Mike says Ellen Jack owned a majority of the famous and rich Black Queen mine. Yep. I have been up to that, Mike. You bet. Been years ago. Mary Ann Regan, thanks to the person who gifted me their book tonight. That's me, Mary Ann. Thanks.
Oh, Karen, she gave it up.
Oh, Karen gave it up. Karen Zelenko, yes. Nancy, really nice comment. Thanks, Nancy. Really appreciate it. Any other comments or questions? If not, it's been fantastic having everybody on board. Vanden Bush and Belinda Holm, over and out.